in the Meru culture, we have always had homosexuals. So he said, what do you mean? He says, when I was a child, the grandmother said, when I was a child, there were two men that lived together. They were, I guess now some people would call them witch doctors, but they were healers. They were people who worked with traditional medicine. They lived together. The whole community knew those people have a special relationship, but they never interfered with them. They were respected because of the role that they played in the society. And therefore, it is not new to me as a Mumeru that I have a grandson who is gay. Kikuyus, Kalenjins, most communities wore shukas. Men, let me put it this way. Men wore shukas.
Yeah.
They wore wraps.
Yeah.
They didn't wear trousers.
Yeah.
They didn't have underpants.
Mm-hmm.
Would you call that a drag show?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we can agree
Yes.
that being gay or being in a same-sex relationship does not give license to people to harm you
Of course.
or to deny, then we're on the same page.
So I'm gonna try to be as very balanced on this, because we all here also have very strong positions, sometimes on opposite sides on this issue.
True.
But is this issue a Western imposed agenda, or is it part of the broader fight for dignity and safety for people within those communities in Kenya? Now, how should we think about this issue while also acknowledging local religious and cultural norms and without falling into ideological traps?
Sure.
Or
So-
as UK said, it's a non-issue.
Yes, and Irungu will tell you, be very careful when you answer this question.
Nimeanza kuogopa sasa.
Yes. Usiogope.
Okay, sawa.
Usiogope.
So let me start with
Usiogope but ogopa.
Yeah.
Let me
See
start.
DJs.
Let me phrase it this way. I think is I guess same-sex relationships an invention of the West, or is it an African reality? Right? It is an African reality.
Correct.
About a decade ago, I interviewed Eric Gitari. Eric Gitari was the executive director of the National Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. And I asked him, as a gay man, and he's openly a gay man. He's now doing his PhD somewhere in the United States, and somebody I highly respect. And I said to him, listen, what was it like being, what was that moment like when you discovered your sexuality? And he told a story about how, and it's in my book, and this is not a shameless plug, but ladies and gentlemen, if you could go to Amazon and just pay for a copy of my book.
Mbona kukuja na kitabu
wait,
ambayo
wait,
anapiga
No,
sahihi?
no, no. What's the title of the book?
Si angekuja na kitabu
No,
apige sahihi.
the title of the book.
Okay, the title of the book is Dialogue and Dissent, A Country in Search of a Constitution.
Dialogue and Dissent, a country in search of a constitution, and it's on Amazon.
It's on Amazon, but the good news, and this is why I probably will be invited back to the studio, I have also made it available free to download on my website, irongohoughton.org.
Okay. So those are two plugs. Your invoice to Tatuma.
Yes,
Eh?
but you can also read it online.
Okay.
But in the book, there's a series of interviews. So I interview a lot of human rights defenders back in 2014. One of them is Eric Gitari.
Yeah.
So I asked Eric, like that moment when you discovered your sexuality and that you liked men, what was that like? And he said one of the most difficult things was coming out to his family, to have this conversation. So he went to talk to his father. His father at the time did not accept it. He just got up and walked out the room, just couldn't handle it. The person that he was most worried about was his grandmother, because he had been brought up by his grandmother. And she, again, 2 generations above him. And he started blubbering, he said, in Kimeru. He tells the story very funnily. He started blubbering in Kimeru, and he couldn't figure out what was the Kimeru term for this, right? This person that he was, right? And she interrupted him and said, but, stop being foolish. In the Meru culture, we have always had homosexuals. So he said, what do you mean? He says, when I was a child, the grandmother said, when I was a child, there were 2 men that lived together. They were, I guess now some people would call them witch doctors, but they were healers. They were people who worked with traditional medicine. They lived together. The whole community knew those people have a special relationship, but they never interfered with them. They were respected because of the role that they played in the society. And therefore, it is not new to me as a Mumeru that I have a grandson who is gay. Now, I tell this story because, it is probably a Western invention that you have to fly to Europe and America to become gay. There are gay people in Kenya, and they have always been there.
Okay, Irungu, and not to cut you.
I was taking off. That was just the first story.
That's just the first story.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if you want to guide it more.
No. So okay. Then let me let you finish the story. So
You want
that
me to
I
land? Because I want to challenge certain things. Sure.
On that story.
You want to challenge Eric's story?
I'm not challenging
Because
Eric's
I would
story.
have to invite him here.
I'm not challenging Eric's story.
Okay.
I'm challenging the idea about this being an invention of the West.
Right.
I don't think there's any normal person who will say that homosexuality was non-existent
Okay.
in Africa.
So we get that base.
So we're in agreement with that. But then there's this, and of course there are some people, just the same way there are people who spread false information. But I think there's no one, even in the different generations, if we talk to your grandparents, there's no one who will say that this is a brand new thing that we've never seen. But then I think that's something that's sometimes thrown at the people who, for one reason or another, do not agree with that lifestyle, and it's thrown at them as they're saying that this thing has never existed. Now, I'll tell you what's different in the West and in African societies, or in Kenya specifically. In the West, they consume this different, and in the West, they have switched over time, on this issue. There's something especially in the West, called pageantry, whereby they walk on parades and everything.
The Pride Day in June.
Yes. So, and that happens a lot. The drag, the pageantry. So that wasn't something that, at least that I saw in Africa. And those are some of the things that are trying to being introduced. So it was there. The people were not, I'm not going to say there was no persecution, but then Western societies are the ones that had the worst kinds of persecution of people who are of same sex. So I think we need to be clear on the fact that I don't think there's anyone with a clear mind who will say this thing never existed. But I think how it is perceived and consumed in the West, which has changed, and they've changed how they talk about other people based on the way they've changed, is what is different. And different communities had different ways in the way they were dealing with them. And I think part of the problem is introducing that Western way of consumption within an African context. So I just wanted to make that clear for contextual purposes. But of course, I can't challenge a story that's not mine.
No, for sure.
Yes.
So Kikuyus, Kalenjins, most communities wore shukas. Men, let me put it this way. Men wore shukas.
Yeah.
They wore wraps.
Yeah.
They didn't wear trousers.
Yeah.
They didn't have underpants.
Mm-hmm.
Would you call that a drag show?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the feature is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
They are, people, male characters who identify as female personalities are putting on what would be considered by, I guess, mainstream heterosexual society as cross-dressing. Right? That's a drag show. I mean, a drag show is just cross-dressing.
No.
Okay. But let me
and I think that's a part. So those are the parts where we're going to agree to disagree, and this is going to be very long.
Can I move us to another point?
Yes, move us.
So, as Amnesty International,
yes,
we recognize a number of things. One is that the Constitution essentially has two major clauses in it. The first one is Article 27, which is the right to be equal and to be treated equally without being discriminated. The second one that is in the Constitution that is the idea that Article 45 is that the family marital unit is made up of persons of both sexes.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't say which sexes. So it doesn't say male and female, but it could be a male person, an intersex person, or a male person, right? Now, these are constitutional guidelines, guardrails for the society, right? So as Amnesty International, our position has always been that to persecute somebody for loving somebody of the same sex is actually, it's a human rights violation.
Okay.
Right? To essentially have them lose their job, to be evicted from their homes, to be murdered, like Sheila Lumumba, simply because she was a lesbian, or I'll come back. There are other cases that we've had.
Agreed.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if we can agree
Yes.
that being gay or being in a same-sex relationship does not give license to people to harm you
Of
or
course.
to deny, then we're on the same page.
Yes. And I think there's
Let me just come to one last
Yeah,
one. I
okay.
think most Kenyans. I mean, there are some people who, and let's be clear, some people would say it's an abomination, right?
Of course.
It's anti-Christian, it's anti-Muslim, it is there's all that anti.
yeah.
But I think most Kenyans are at a place where they would say, a bit like the "don't ask, don't tell" policy in America,
Yeah.
right? Or the
They used to be in the
comment-
military.
the comment of President Uhuru way back when, where he says, "Listen,
It's a non-issue.
It's not that he's saying it's not important. What he's saying is that there are bigger issues that are there, and that somebody who identifies as an LGBTIQ person, that person should not be deprived of all the other rights, right? So on that one, we're together, right? My position, a very simple one, and I keep saying to this.
So
the day
I
that-
think,
Let me just finish on the last
yeah.
one, and I'll stop then.
Yeah.
The day that the government comes into my bedroom
Yeah.
to start analyzing who I'm sleeping with, is the day that I would declare that my bedroom is too small for that. And I've told
Yes.
my wife that the day that we must fight the government is the day that they come into our bedroom.
Yeah.
As long as nobody's getting hurt,
Yes.
right? So there's some consensual stuff happening there. I'm paraphrasing because of the children who may be listening. The fact is, our bedrooms are not places for states to intervene.